We're on chapter 4, and this is you know, I tend to filibuster, but it's not. It's more of a bi-directional. So if you want to talk, um, you just do that, and online too. If you want, we have microphones in the room so that people on Zoom can hear us. So that's back and forth. This is a Bible study. We're doing the Book of John lately because it's nice to know what I'm going to speak on next week. Okay, so the first thing I have, I'm going to open this with a question. Who knows what language they were speaking and what language John was writing in? We don't know. Do you know why we don't know? Because it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. What they were talking, because Yeshua is talking to a woman of Samaria, where they have their own kind of dialect of Hebrew, and Aramaic is present, and Hebrew is present, and Greek is present. But we didn't need to know what language they were talking to. They were talking to with each other. We didn't need to know that. The exchange, the word, in our way, there's a lot made about syllables and vowels and languages and stuff like that. But if it was important, they would have recorded it, and it wasn't important. What was important is what actually happened, and it transcends language. It comes into English just fine, and we can understand what they were talking about. Verse 1 and 2, therefore, when the Lord knew that the Pharisees had heard that Yeshua was making and baptizing more disciples than John, although Yeshua himself was not baptizing, but his disciples were, he left Judea and went again into Galilee. Now, I did just say something about language and then all of a sudden blurted out Hebrew words. So let me explain. I like the NASB 95 because I find it to be very scholarly and very literal and very easy to read. But I also like using Yeshua's real name. So I just flip that in my head, right? So it's just kind of a manual change. Yeshua, the word Yeshua means salvation. In Isaiah 52:10, it says, behold, how lovely are the feet of those who bring good news and those who preach Yahweh's salvation, right? That's talking about Yeshua being Yahweh's salvation, which ties right into this because this is talking about agency, right? It says Yeshua was baptizing, that he was making and baptizing more, but he wasn't actually doing the work. That's agency, that his disciples were baptizing, and it's recorded as Yeshua was doing the work because he was the agent of which that was happening. Same as when it says Moses brought the people out of Israel. Moses didn't actually bring the people out of Israel. Yahweh brought the people out of Israel. Moses was the agent of which that work happened. So sometimes we get hyper literal in our studies and forget that they have nuances to the way they communicate, whether it's in Greek or Hebrew or whatever language it might be. Um, the
That
well,
that that applies even in some cases where it says God said. Who
yeah,
knows who said it, really?
sometimes. Sometimes who knows who said it? You're right. Thus saith Yahweh is almost always comes from a prophet, right? The only time he directly spoke was the Ten Commandments and then when Yeshua was baptized. Well, there's probably more. I'm sure somebody out there is typing up a letter right now. But but,
Yeah.
but yeah, good one.
Even from who spoke the Ten Commandments, that was probably not the Most High. That was probably Yeshua that was doing that.
Maybe. Could be. Yep. But it was definitely not Yeshua when he got baptized. No ventriloquism present. Okay. Okay. Like a puppet. Right. So in verse 3, he oh no. I wonder why I have that as 3. He comes to Samaria. He came to a city called Sychar near the parcel of ground that Jacob gave to his son Joseph, and Jacob's well was there. So Yeshua, being wearied from his journey, was sitting thus by the well, and it was about the 6th hour. Um, did a little hunting, pecking, and does anybody find in the Old Testament where where this well was created? Anybody find that in the pre-reading that I know you all did this week? Jacob's well. I couldn't find anything, right? Yeah. Yeah. But the well existed for 2,000 years. That's pretty impressive. And he comes and he meets this lady all by himself, not an accident. Okay. He's sitting by the well, right? And he was sitting by the well. There comes a woman from Samaria to draw water. Yeshua says, "Give me to drink," for his disciples had gone away into the city to buy food. So there's reasons why he's all by himself to get this first meeting happening here. They likely would have flipped out. Remember, when we fast forward a little bit, they're astonished that he's just talking to a woman. Not only is he talking to a woman, he's talking to an adulteress from the loathsome Samaritans. So if his disciples had been with him, then we would have had noise. What are you doing? Why are you talking to her? Right? Interruptions. So he gets to talk to her one-on-one. There's a little bit for us to glean from that, because he started in Luke 4 when he starts to his his ministry. He starts by irritating everybody at the synagogue, talking about miracles that Yahweh had done to Gentiles in days of old. And they don't want to hear about it. They want Yahweh to themselves. And this is showing us that we all get to come to Yeshua, that we all get to come to Yahweh through the Son. Okay. And so his disciples had gone away to buy food. And therefore the Samaritan woman said to him, "How is it to you, being a Jew, ask me for a drink, since I am a Samaritan woman? For Jews have no dealings with Samaritans." Not without cause. Okay. When Nehemiah and Ezra reestablished Judea after coming back, they read the law and they read the history, and they knew they got sent into captivity for mixing. That's why they got smote. They were smote for mixing pagan religion with the worship of the true Elohim. And so when they found that out, they said, "That does it, everybody out." Right? Right. And they sent the women and the children out, which is why today Jews believe that the lineage of a Jew today comes only from the woman, not from the man, because the women and the children that came through the women were dismissed, which means the Jew half part got the boot with them. So today, when Jews say that the lineage comes through the woman, then that's why that happens. Do you know why that's handy for us? Anybody? Because Yeshua's mom was a Jew, and she was miraculously conceived, right? So it's pretty handy for us that the lineage comes through the woman too, right? Because Yahweh is effectively the dad, right? By miracle, not literal miracle, and then Mary gave birth. So the lineage comes from two. Everett, what's up?
Of course, the opposite of that is the daughters of Zelophehad, Zelophehad, or whatever his name was, that weren't going to get any property because they were female.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And they had to stand up for themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah. The lesson for us is don't ever let that happen again. Don't make people have to stand up for stuff that belongs to them, right? So the Samaritans are a mixed race people who were derived from the pagan mixing with the northern kingdom. And they made up a pure religion and called themselves the true Israelites. They worship on Mount. They exist today. There's about 900 of them that still exist, and I have their Torah on the back just for fun today. And so they exist today, and which is neat that we have people who stayed there and still exist, traced all the way back to this exchange. But the Jews do not like them, right? Because the Jews we're God's people, and the Israelite Samaritans are, nah, we are. There's going to be a little bit of feud going on there. The Israelite Samaritans do not believe in Jerusalem as a holy city. They don't believe in the prophets. They stop at Moses and nothing else. And they worship on Mount Gerizim. They still do sacrifices. They still have all that stuff. And they are loathed by everybody in the region because the rest of the region, the Canaanites, they don't want anything to do with the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, right? They don't like them, right? And then you have the Jews who want to be insular. Then you have the Romans who just want to be in charge of everybody. And then you have these people. So for Yeshua to be talking to this individual is really, really noteworthy. It's not just a little bit noteworthy. It's really noteworthy that he went there so early in his ministry. We're kind of like them, if you think about it, because we who keep the Sabbath and the holy days and follow the Torah, and we kind of read the Jews, but we're not really going to do Judaism, and we kind of read Christianity, but we're not going to do Christianity. We're kind of living in this little middle ground here today that's similar, right? When I've met Jewish people because I wear a zitziot all the time, not just on Shabbat, not a pretender, right? So when I've met one time in San Francisco at a hotel, there was a guy from Israel there who looked at me and looked at me and looked at me. And he said, "Why are you wearing that?" And being a Bible student, I said, "Is it not written?" Right? Right? What's the Bible say to do? And he's like, "Are you Jewish?" I said, "Not really." He said, "We're just Christians who keep the Torah. And they don't know what to do with us." There was another rabbi I met on an airplane when I was reading the book of Josephus, was traveling a lot. And the Josephus Antiquities of the Jews, I have the whole set in one book. So it's pretty easy to see. And I'm on a Southwest Airlines plane. And this rabbi about my age, heavyset, Orthodox rabbi, gets and sits in the only seat on the plane. It's open seating that can see what I'm reading. And we have a great conversation. He turns out to be a professor of religious studies at Miami University. And he's like, "What? What are you reading that for?" And I said, "Well, I like to study first century Christianity because we follow it." He's like, it was a great conversation. When I said we keep Sukkot, he's like, "You keep it with an etrog?" I said, "Sometimes we use a lemon." He was, "What?" Right? Right. My question for him, because I was deep in study at that time, and he was trying to tell me about the color blue. We were talking about Zitziot and why they don't wear blue. And he says, because they can't figure out the proper shade of blue. Right. And I'm like, well, that seems important. Right. And he said they thought they might have gotten it because they found some snail that could produce blue dye and they were using that. And I went and said, "Well, are you sure? Because that would be an unclean animal." Then he was really interested in talking to me, right? Because why would a Gentile care about clean and unclean? And so we had a really good talk. But when it boils down to it, the rest of the believing world, the people who believe in, Genesis to Revelation or Genesis to Malachi, depending on how you go, they don't know what to do with us. And we kind of fall into that Samaritan Israelite camp. Now we're not making up our own. We're not saying that we're the only people with the truth. Okay. Okay. I mean, we are not saying that we're the only people with the truth. That's gone. That stuff needs to go away. We are all sinners in need of a Messiah. We all have to learn along the way. None of us has it 100% right. So we don't do any of that jazz. What you got, Marcin?
Wasn't it a Samaritan woman also that Yeshua called a dog? You, you know what I'm referring to?
I believe.
I think it was a dog. A dog.
I think she
and
called herself a dog.
well,
She
no,
says
I
even the
think
dogs under the table get scraps.
no, I think Yeshua did call her a dog
Really?
because well, there's like some people say he was being rude and stuff.
Yeah.
And then she said, but even the dogs eat the crumbs off the master's table.
Right.
And so that
All right.
I was just thinking about that when you were speaking because it's like we like I feel like that sometimes, like an outsider, like not wanted,
Oh.
not even like the chosen people, but just grafted in just by grace. Um, and yeah, so I was just making that connection with that woman, and here it's also a Samaritan woman.
Yep. Yep. Good. All right. No problem. Yeah. So we get down. He says, if you knew the gift of God and who it is that says to you, give me a drink, you would have asked him and he would have given you living water. She says, sir, you have nothing to draw with and the well is deep. Where do you get that living water? You're not greater than our father Jacob, are you? Who gave us this well and drank of it himself and his sons and his cattle. And Yeshua answered and said, everyone who drinks of this water will thirst again, but whoever drinks of the water that I will give him shall never thirst. But the water that I will give him will become in him a well of water springing up to eternal life. There's a lot of things he could have said here. Primarily, your father's not Jacob, mine is. She wasn't really a child of Jacob. Remember, the Samaritans are this mutt mixed thing who maybe she had some lineage to Jacob, maybe she didn't. And that's what, if she had said that to when the disciples were there, they would have flipped out, right? Especially the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the non-disciples, right? She calling her father Jacob when they think they're the only people who are descended, but he doesn't correct her. She's kind of poking him by saying our father Jacob. And he says, you know what? Everything that, everybody who drinks of this water will thirst again. And we'll get into where that comes from in a second. Sir, give me this water so I will not be thirsty nor come all the way here to draw. She's out looking at it as a literal. And she's saying, wait a minute, there's some water I can have where I don't have to come to the well every day. Operators are standing by. Where do I buy this? Right. And that's not what he meant. But if you think about the insight that gives to her life is toil, is turmoil. She's had 5 husbands. She's had chaos. She's probably not even drawing water for herself. She's probably drawing water to take to her husband that she has to serve so she has a place to live. She's, this is a person that we can really relate to because of the way that our society is so messed up today with broken families, broken homes. And so she's looking at, you can solve my problems, right? I would love for you to do that. But that's not what he was talking about. He says, you've had 5 husbands. The one you have now is not your husband. This you have said truly. And, I skipped the line. And he says, sir, I perceive you're a prophet. Now, she didn't what would happen if this was a Jewish woman? Stoned to death for having the adultery, right? Because she's like, yeah, you're right. And when she finds out that he's a prophet, her response is really cool because she says, our fathers worshipped on this mountain, and you people say that in Jerusalem is a place of worship. And he says, believe me, an hour is coming when neither in this mountain or Jerusalem will you worship the Father. She just realized, I'm in the presence of a real prophet, and she asks him the most important doctrinal dispute of her people. She says, wait a minute, he knows this. I bet he can answer that one too. Isn't that what we would do today? Right? How do you really say Yeshua? Right? Right? How do you really say Yahweh? Why are we throwing darts at the wall with this calendar stuff? Right? And in reality, those questions are pretty darn trivial. If you find yourself in the presence of the Son of God, you should probably be thinking like, I'm on my face, right? Right? You should probably different.
Was she an adulteress if she didn't have a husband? Like she was not an adulteress, but a whore.
I was being polite,
Well,
Miss Tiffany.
No, there's no polite. This, whether she is or isn't. But adulteress is a woman who's married who commits adultery on her husband.
But also, mitzvah says that if he puts her away and she gets another, that's where I was going. Or I was
But was she
assuming
ever
it.
married and put away? What to me, she was never married. She said, "I don't have a husband."
All right.
So to me, she had multiple men, but not a husband. And maybe that's where he was saying, "Well, you've had 5 because she's laid with 5." I don't know. That's what I'm assuming.
Entirely possible.
Also, I think he went and was there at the 6th hour. Is that like 6 in the morning, or what part of the day is this? It's early where no one else would be there to bother her or give her.
I think it's noon.
Oh, is it noon? Okay, because I wasn't
9th
sure.
hour is when he was crucified, and that's 3 in the afternoon.
Okay,
So
so maybe it's
yeah.
not that.
I think it's noon. I think it's the heat of the day. Now, before we cruise on, he said that about the water. Everyone who drinks of this water, if you knew, all right, here it is. If you knew the gift of God and who it is who says to you, give me a drink, you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water. What part of the Bible do we learn about living water? Where's the first mention of this? Does anybody know?
Probably in connection with the mitzvah. The
Mikvah.
mikvah.
Is it, was it when Moses struck the rock for the water?
We do associate it to that, but that's not exactly where I'm going. Because they did get thirsty again after they drank that, right? So Jeremiah 17:13. O Yahweh, the hope of Israel, all who forsake you will be put to shame. Those who turn away on earth will be written down because they have forsaken the fountain of living water, even Yahweh. She's a Samaritan. She doesn't know about the book of Jeremiah. So he's being a little coy there, right? When he's talking about the living water. And the fountain of living water is Yahweh. Life comes from the eternal. That's where it comes from. And this chapter is talking about idolatry. It's one of Jeremiah's chapters on repentance. Talks about the sin of Judah. They'll remember their children, the altars and the Asherim, the mountain of mine. It's the sin of Judah being mixing. The Samaritan Israelites are mixers. Here, that might help a little bit. If I make it any bigger, it looks like it's like 4 words on the screen up here. It's like 4. So it talks about the sin of Judah is written down with an iron stylus, a diamond point, engraved on the tablet of their heart and the horns of their altars. So they remember their children, so they remember their altars by their Asherim, by green trees in the high hills. So he goes through and really talks about mixing. Cursed is the man who trusts in mankind and makes flesh his strength. That's another big sin, is trying to put your faith in your own military might. Blessed is the man who trusts in Yahweh and whose trust is Yahweh, for he will be like a tree planted by the water that extends its roots by a stream and will not fear when the heat comes. Remember, it's noon. It's noon when they're having this conversation, right? And what happens in Revelation when the tree is sitting over the waters and it blooms all the time and it has all the fruit on it? But its leaves will be green, and it will not be anxious in a year of drought, nor cease to yield fruit. The heart is more deceitful than all else and is desperately sick. Who can understand it? I, Yahweh, search the heart. I test the mind, even to give to each man according to his ways, according to the results of his deeds. Yeshua at the well did what to this woman? He searched her heart. He knew she had the 5 husbands, and her reaction is so genuine. It's so not what you're going to see in Judea. Her reaction is just so I've got this guy, I'm going to have a conversation with him. It's hospitable. She's going to get him the water, and it's very genuine. And he's searching her heart with this conversation. Not that he even needed to do that, because he already knew everything, right? He could just knew her whole life history in a minute and a half. Uh, yeah. As a partridge that hatches eggs, which it has not laid, so is he who makes a fortune, but unjustly. In the midst of his days, it will forsake him, and in the end, he will be a fool. A glorious throne on high from the beginning is the place of our sanctuary. O Yahweh, the hope of Israel, all who forsake you will be put to shame. Those who turn away on earth will be written down because they have forsaken the fountain of living water, even Yahweh. It's interesting to get the context. Jeremiah then asked for deliverance. Heal me, O Yahweh, for I will be healed. Save me and I will be saved. You are my praise. Look, they keep saying to me, where is the word of Yahweh? Let it come now. Who's Yeshua? The word of Yahweh, talking to the lady at the well, right? Right. But as for me, I have not hurried away from being a shepherd after you, nor have I longed for the woeful day. You yourself know the utterance of my lips was in your presence. Do not be a terror to me. You are my refuge in the day of disaster. Let those who persecute me be put to shame. But as for me, let me not be put to shame. Let them be dismayed, but let me not be dismayed. Bring on them a day of disaster and crush them twofold. Then it goes into keeping the Sabbath holy. I think that's kind of interesting. I don't know how to connect that to the conversation with the lady at the well, but I think that's interesting that it's in the same chapter. And it says, thus Yahweh said to me, go and stand in the public gate through which the kings of Judah come in and go out, as well as in the gates of Jerusalem, and say to them, listen to the word of Yahweh, kings of Judah, and all inhabitants of Jerusalem who come in through these gates. Thus says Yahweh, take heed for yourselves and do not carry any load on the Sabbath day or bring anything through the gates of Jerusalem. You shall not bring a load out of your houses on the Sabbath day, nor do any work. Keep the Sabbath day holy, as I commanded your fathers. And they did not listen or incline their ears, but stiffened their necks in order not to listen or take correction. But it will come about if you listen attentive to me, declares Yahweh, to bring no load through the gates of the city on Sabbath, but to keep the Sabbath day. Then there will come in through the gates of the city kings and princes sitting on the throne of David, riding in chariots and on horses, they and all their princes and the men of Judah and the inhabitants of Jerusalem, and this city will be inhabited forever. They will come in from the cities of Judah and from the environs of Jerusalem, from the land of Benjamin and the lowland. But if you don't listen to me, none of this is going to happen. Right? Right? So I think it's interesting that the repentance that he's talking to Israel is about Sabbath keeping. A lot of people, don't really pay attention to that these days. Seems like it's going to be pretty important in the not too distant future. Somebody asked me online, what do you do to somebody who doesn't keep the Sabbath day? Like I'm supposed to say stone them to death or something. Obviously, even in the Old Testament, the same answer was stop breaking the Sabbath, start keeping the Sabbath, and you'll be blessed. It's not, they always want to make it out to be harder than it was. Sorry for the tangent, but always want to read when the New Testament quotes the Old Testament, always want to go read the whole context to make sure we've covered all of our bases, right? It's not just random sentences pulled out of the Old Testament. It's intended for us to go look at the actual context. That's how Jewish people cited scripture. They didn't have chapters and verses. They cited it like this. The other place about not thirsting is Isaiah 49:10. This is a study, so if I'm rambling, you guys can, or if I spur some comment, you can say something. Isaiah 49:10, they will not hunger or thirst, nor will the scorching heat or sun strike them down, for he who has compassion on them will lead them and will guide them to springs of water. I will make all my mountains a road, and my highways will be raised up. Behold, these will come from afar, and lo, these will come from the north and the west, and these from the land of Sinim. Shout for joy, O heavens, and rejoice, O earth. Break forth into joyful shouting, O mountains, for Yahweh has comforted his people and will have compassion on his afflicted. Is Yeshua having compassion on the afflicted at the well? Yes. So both of these references, and this, I got this from, I'm not like some super genius. I have a little tool over here called commentaries that tells me where to find these things, right? And it is very striking that he is telling her, not only does he reveal he's the Messiah, he's also revealing that another step in the process to the full restoration of the land is here. That both Jeremiah and Isaiah are talking about millennial or beyond events. They're talking about restoration. Jeremiah says that once Judah repents, keeps the Sabbath, then all mankind is going to come back to Judea. This is talking about the same time when the mountains are brought low and there's all the highways and everybody comes into Jerusalem. So there's a lot more going on here than meets the eye. Now, I haven't completely put it all together. Maybe you guys could do that in your spare time. Okay. So back to the lady at the well. So he talks about drinking of this water will thirst again. This should be in all caps. Remember in NASB, when it quotes the Old Testament, it puts it in all caps. Should be in all caps to tell us to read those 2 chapters. So, it goes on, perceives she's a prophet, 13 to 14. The other place that references about eternal life and living water is 1 John 5:20. It says, he who has the Son has life, and he who does not have the Son does not have the life. The actual commentaries associated the knowledge of the Messiah with eternal life at that passage, which I thought was pretty slick.
I think there's another reference in John 7 where it talks about the last day of the Sukkot. Yeshua talks about those who believe will have their bellies will flow with, or living water will flow from their bellies, I think it's going to say.
Where is it? I'm looking.
It's around verse 37 or so, I think, 36.
On the last day, the great day of the feast, Yeshua stood out and cried out, if anyone is thirsty, let him come to me and drink. Yeah, sure enough. He's actually doing exactly the same thing. He who believes in me, as the scripture has said, from his innermost being will flow rivers of living water. Same references, right? But this he spoke of the Spirit, whom those who believed in him were to receive, for the Spirit was not yet given, because Yeshua had not yet been glorified. And some of the people therefore were saying, this certainly is the prophet. Others were saying, this is the Messiah. Still others were saying, surely the Messiah is not going to come from Galilee, is he? Has not the scripture said that the Messiah comes from the descendants of David and from Bethlehem, the village where David was? So division occurred in the crowd because of him. So very good to bring us there, because the next part of this is what happens after he talks to this gal. Okay. What does she do? You guys remember? Or did you? Go ahead. John 4. Yeah. You're like, I'll read it. So verse 24. Maybe we'll come back to God as Spirit. Maybe, right? But the woman said to him, I know that Messiah is coming. He who is called Christ. When that one comes, he will declare all things to us. And he said, I'm he. Okay. Who are the 2 people at this point that he's actually revealed himself to? Okay. It's a foreshadowing of the end of days. Who was the first person that he actually revealed himself to? John 3. Let first, like outside the disciples. Nicodemus, one of the leaders of the Pharisees. He has the private meeting with Nicodemus, and now he has a private meeting with a Gentile. Jew and Gentile coming together. The 2 private meetings are head, very high muckety muck Jewish guy, right? And here, very lowly, very humble, very complete opposite spectrum. A female at that, right? Is a female even going to get taken seriously in Judea? No, right? She's no, you lady, get out of here, right? But here, the Samaritans have a totally different culture, because she goes and the disciples show up and they're amazed that he had been speaking with a woman. They don't even go, well, what was that all about? They're like, they're just totally messed up that he was talking to a lady. Like guys, what the heck? And that's the juxtaposition I wanted to draw here is that the Jews is very into culture that they couldn't see the trees from the forest. They couldn't see what was happening. That Martha was all wanted to make was all worried about making food, and this lady was like, I have a prophet in front of me. She knows he already knows all her sins. She's already over that in the blink of an eye, and she's asking about doctrine. The Messiah is going to reveal all things. I'm him. She got rewarded with that knowledge because of her contrite heart and her curiosity, her like, you know what? I've sinned and there's nothing I could do about that. Yesterday is gone, right? And she's right in front of them. These guys are all like still torn up in knots over their culture and over all the norms, and they're all messed up. And so the woman does what? She leaves her water part, goes into the city and says to the men, come see a man who told me all the things I've done. This is not the Messiah, is it? She's not even ashamed to go tell the men of the city that this guy identified my sin. She drops her water pot. That's what he's looking for. In his ministry, he's looking for people who aren't worried about tomorrow. They're not worried about today. He's looking for people who are going to drop what they're doing and follow it. And not, yeah, Mike, go on.
Not ashamed to say the truth to others.
Right. Right. It's she's like, wait a minute. This is the Messiah. He knows everything. And then they go out to the city and they come to him. This is a complete opposite of Judea, of the Jews. Mirror image. She, not an upstanding citizen by any stretch of the imagination. I'll refrain from using the language that we used for earlier, right? And then she goes and tells the guys, I think I found the Messiah. They're Samaritans. The only way they know of Messiah is Deuteronomy 18, one like Moses. They're like, really? Let's go. And they get up and go, right? What happens when he's resurrected and the ladies go and say he's resurrected? They don't believe them. They go and check it out, right? These guys are like, Messiah, they drop what they're doing and they go meet him. And that's how we're supposed to be. And that's probably why we're here in this little room on Shabbat in the middle of 21st century, right? And so the disciples were urging him, saying, Rabbi, eat. They were, again, concerned about his royalty, concerned about his creature comfort, concerned about the problems of the world. And he's like, I've got food to eat that you don't know about. And the disciples are, well, nobody brought anything to eat, did he? They're all like, if you think about it, it's kind of a sitcom. Like they're off in the corner missing the point, like Baghdad Bob with the Americans are not in Baghdad and the tank goes right behind them, right? They are so missing the point here. And he's like, my food is the will of him, to do the will of him who sent me and accomplish his work. And he says, don't you say there's 4 months and then comes the harvest? I say, lift up your eyes, look on the fields. They're white. He's like, guys, look, they're coming to me, right? Right? We'll worry about the food later. Somebody probably wants to talk. I'm on a tear. Anyway, he's he who reaps is receiving wages, is gathering fruit for life eternal, so that he who sows will reap and may rejoice together. For in this case, the saying is true: one sows and another reaps. I sent you to reap that for which you have not labored. Others have labored, and you have not, and you have entered into their labor. From that city, many of the Samaritans believed in him because of the word of the woman who testified, he told me all things that I've done. So when the Samaritans came to Yeshua, they were asking him to stay with him. He stayed 2 days. One chance meeting with the lady turns into 2 days of ministry, and he converted the whole region. 3 years of doing miracles with the Jews. Okay. Okay. 3 days with the Samaritans, 3 years with the Jews. Stubborn. And we need to not be stubborn. So she dropped what she's doing. And golly, if that isn't what he was begging the Judeans to understand, I wrote that earlier, right? No looking back, just go. Don't worry about thirst when you have access to eternal life. Now, I'm telling you this because it's easy to say. It's hard to do. Really hard to do. When you got 4 generations of your family, I've got my dad, me, my son, and now a newborn. Really hard being in the middle of that, saying, let tomorrow sort itself out. No, spend a fair amount of time worrying about tomorrow, right? And it's very easy to say, very hard to do. The people listened to the known adulteress and came out. Would the Jews have done this? They would not.
One of the things he said was that it's neither here at Gerizim nor in Jerusalem will you be worshiping. That although he kind of pushed the Jewish approach to things, he said, the way they're doing it isn't going to last very long either. We're gonna move on. Yeah.
This is another case. I had that in here too. It's hard to cover it all. That he didn't answer her question because there wasn't an answer to that question then. And there isn't really an answer to that question now. Isn't Jerusalem where he's coming back? Isn't that where he's bringing the temple? He's going to restore it? So the answer is yes. In 2,000 years, right? Because he's about to go and be murdered, resurrected, and then have Judea destroyed until his return. And so he really couldn't answer that question in a short amount of time, because the answer was like Everett just said, none of the above, right? What's about to happen, something different is about to happen, and where you worship isn't going to matter as much as how and who. Again, another with the physical, right? They think, just like our brothers and sisters today think, if they get the name right, they're going to be met with a chariot of fire out front, right? They're so worried about works and getting it right that we miss the bigger picture, spiritual aspects of it. So worried about getting it right. So they're so worried about getting right with the food and the ministering to the Messiah. And they're worried about, are we supposed to be going to Judea? Are we supposed to be going here to Mount Gerizim? And he's like, relax. That's not going to matter for much longer. 30 more years, that's not even going to be a consideration, right? Nobody's going to come worship at that pile of rubble. And here we are today, right? We don't have that. Yes, ma'am. Oh, you had something to say.
I'll have some say for him.
Okay.
That would be difficult to do because coming out of Christianity into this, I still feel a workspace pull. Like,
yeah.
Like I still want to do everything right and perfect and do what the word says and do that right. And then I feel condemned if I don't do it right. So there is an aspect of physical works. And then that spiritual side also is like, will I be forgiven for this? Or so that mind plays tricks on you to some degree too.
We wouldn't be here today if works didn't matter.
Yeah. And as Jews, that's all they were based out of. So going from all to partial, that would be a different cult mindset to change.
Yep. Hi. It's not on. It's not on. Yeah.
I don't know that Jews are as works-based as we make them out to be, actually. I was in Israel last fall, and actually I was on Mount Gerizim, right across from Samaria, which is pretty cool.
All
But I met a lot of Jewish people who are like David, whose hearts are after God's heart, and it's not about works to them. It's about connecting with the Father, and they don't even believe in Yeshua. But yes, it was a total paradigm shift for me being there, because so many things that I was taught in the church just aren't true. But anyway, so I hear that often, that Jews are all works-based, and I've met a lot of Jews that are not works-based. I don't think that that's their foundation, actually.
Yeah. So the reference here is the Jews here, the Jews in the book, right? The Jews that were around him, their behavior, right? There's been 2,000 years, and the Christianity started in the synagogue, and Judaism today is influenced by the early days of Christianity. If you go through a Seder, If you go through a traditional Seder, it's got a lot of stuff in there about the light of the world. It's got a lot of things in there. You're like, wait a minute, I know that, right? So they have grown over the last 2,000 years. So when we talk about the Jews, we're almost always talking about these ones, right? In the New Testament, not the people today. Today, they're a really big mixed bag. They have Orthodox, ultra Orthodox, Reformed, and then just there's another one, and then there's most of them are just ethnic Jews. They're secular people, and so there's no real way to even broadly talk about them as a people today. They're mixed up like the rest of us. Yeah. Cool. Anybody else? Keep talking. Doesn't have to be me all the time.
Even at that time, there were a lot of people that were listening to Yeshua. And they undoubtedly didn't listen just once. They came back time and time and time again, so they recognized the perspective that he was, bringing forth. But it was unfortunately the leadership that were trying to protect their own backside and their position and promote themselves. And that was the big problem.
So I can take it up a notch, because when John came baptizing, there is no Torah about that, right? And they were open to doing it. So they're not, I agree with you, right? Because they were okay with new stuff. Go ahead. Yeah.
I don't. So when I was in Israel, we got baptized in the Jordan, and during that time, we learned that they actually, in Jesus' time, even that was part of the Jewish tradition, was the mikvahs. They would baptize often, so it's not actually a new concept, and it wasn't a one-time thing. It was, yeah.
So mikvah and what John was doing are different.
Okay.
Mikvah is a routine. Mikvah grew up out of the mitzvot about women going through their cycle and going to mikvah, and men getting healed and coming back from battle. And so that turned into these pools that were built around the synagogues, and they would go to them, like a cleansing, like a periodic thing. A mikvah, we can do mikvah today. John was baptizing for the forgiveness of sins. That's new, right? That last part is the part that's like, where did you come up with that? So yes, you're right. Mikvah itself, and at the time of the Messiah, they would do it. There's even a bunch of oral law about how the water of a mikvah has to be rainwater or from a spring, and if that's not possible, you have to have this other water. They have to kiss each other. I mean, I went on a tangent on that a couple of years ago, right? Because I was like, what, this looks new, right? So I went down the road of like, they were okay with this. They were open with this. And yes, after the Messiah, for probably 10 years, it was almost exclusively Jews that were converting. And Paul was going into the synagogue and they were hearing him out. So you're right. They weren't as closed off but this also says what it says, right? That they're tore up that he's talking to a woman. 10 years later, there's prophetesses in the Bible, right? That 10 years later, people were growing away from that. Okay. Anybody else? You really roll the dice when you have open mic. Now, I don't know what next question is going to be, right? Right. Yeah. But the baptism for the forgiveness of sins was I don't see that in the Torah, right? In the Torah, the sins had to be absolved and through the different sacrifices. And then on the Yom Kippur, they had to go and put them on the goats, and then they put it on the altar and they put it on the curtain. And when he died, the curtain broke in two. So then we see a shift, and there were people who were open, and and then they got invaded, and then but internally there were 4 sects of Judaism when the temple came down. There was Sadducees, Pharisees, Essenes, Sicarii, and Zealots. So 5, right? Essenes aren't really in the Bible that much. And the Jews to this day believe that that they lost their city because of the disunity inside of their faith. Of course, we know Daniel 9:25 tells us why the temple came down, right? The temple came down because of the Messiah, because it was prophesied that from the going forth of the decree to build the temple, there will be the Messiah. And then the next sentence talks about desolations are determined, that Yeshua coming on the scene was the precursor for the temple to be destroyed. It was destroyed because of our Messiah. And he was the one, when he said that the temple will be torn down, he was actually echoing the prophet Daniel. That should be in all caps. So for us, the temple came down because Yahweh said it was time for the temple to go down so that the faith of Yeshua would go across the world, right? But the Jews today believe that it was destroyed because of the disunity inside of the thing. And they were killing each other. They were actually killing each other while Hadrian's army was coming in. Yep. Oh, you want to ask another question, do you? Right? Let's go.
I just read about that fifth group you mentioned, the Zealots. There's a theory that that Judas Iscariot was a zealot, and that he like he was like politically motivated to do what he did with the betrayal and all that. It's an interesting theory. And so the idea is that Yeshua was walking around with at least one known zealot in his party. Yeah. So yeah, at least two. Yeah. Yeah, so that's interesting, and that could be why Yeshua was like seen as a threat to the establishment.
All right. Yeah. Yep.
Because the zealots, they were like violent, from what I understand. Like
Yeah.
they were like assassins basically.
Yeah, I think Sakari and a Zealot might be the same group. Sakari is assassins as well. And yeah, they were willing, it's based on how much violence each group was willing to do. And what's interesting is the Pharisees blame the Sadducees for what do you call it, for compromising. But it was actually the Pharisee rabbis who compromised so that they could exist. There was a Pharisee rabbi that was smuggled out to meet with the Roman leader that starts with the letter T. And they made a deal that they made a deal to move the Sanhedrin away from the temple. And that's when the Pharisees actually benefited from it, from the fall, because the Sadducees were the party that were in charge of the temple, and they all fought to the death. And the Pharisees did not fight to the death, but that was Yahweh's plan. So, I mean, we might as well just shoot all the arrows right now, right? Right. If you look at the 500-year period from the restoration of Judea till Yeshua, what happens is there's synagogues that show up all over the world, and the Bible is translated into Greek. So those were seeds. So that when the faith goes forth from Zion, the base of operation were all of these synagogues. That's why Acts 15 happens. When all the Gentiles start showing up at synagogue, they're like, what do we do with these guys? So they have a meeting about it. Now, if there was a separation and the Gentiles were meeting on Sunday and they had nothing to do with Judaism, Acts 15 never happens. They wouldn't even know, they wouldn't care. They'd be like, oh, they started a new religion. Good for them. Right? But it's because they were together. So it's my opinion that Yahweh used the Pharisees, because Paul was the Pharisee of Pharisees, that he used the Pharisees because they were open to new stuff. They were the ones who kept the whole Old Testament. They're the ones who made the canon of the Old Testament with the Septuagint. They're the ones who had synagogues, which are the precursors to Sunday churches. So the faith had to have a base of operations to go off. So, yeah. Everett, you were ready to say something a paragraph ago.
Yeah, I think it's in Luke 6 that lists out the disciples. And
You were talking to yourself, bro. You muted yourself on accident. I cannot unmute him. Oddly enough, Zoom will not let me spy on people.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so, yeah, Luke 6, down a few verses. He talks about the, yeah, there you go. Verse 15.
Mhm.
So if Judas were a zealot, it would probably say so. But there was another Simon.
Yeah. Now, is Simon called the zealot here because he was part of the zealot group or because he was zealous?
I, yeah, I would presume it was because he was a member of that political party, you know, and or had been a member of that political party. I'm, I,
Alright.
whether or not they were all violent is another question, but they evidently, as a political party, advocated the supremacy of Judah for
I
sure.
think we can all be rather confident that the 12 were violent and they were waiting for Yeshua to say go. And they were going to grab swords and they thought he was Judas Maccabeus. They thought he was coming to physically restore right then. That's why the two brothers were like, who's going to sit on your right and your left? They thought that the restoration of Judea was a carnal restoration, that they were going to launch a revolt and go after the Romans. Much to their chagrin, they watched their Messiah get executed by the Romans. So kind of the opposite of what they were looking for happened. And yeah, so yeah, the violence part, you know, Peter, right, chopped the dude's ear off. They were ready to roll. And that's what they thought was happening. And they had to go ahead.
So what's the deal with the Sons of Thunder?
Yeah, I don't know.
I mean, that was always a question in my mind. I guess I never studied it.
You have the first I don't know of the day, sir. Yeah. Robin? Like, why were they called the Sons of Thunder? Yeah. Let's find out. You know how much smarter we got when we got Control F? We got so smart. Well, it went to the chapter. He named them Boanerges, which means sons of thunder. Come on. You can do it. Chaldee origin, sons of, epithet of two apostles. I don't like it when the things say epithet, because you know they use the word epithet for the word Christian. Not actually true. There's no negative connotation to the word Christian in the New Testament, right? It's not bad. It just means messianic, right? But there's one of these resource tools that actually calls it an epithet. Now, no, Hebrew Roots was like, oh, you can't call me that. I'm like, stop, right? It's okay. It's okay. Yeah. So Bronte is thunder. Now let's just get this over with. G1027, right? We're going to switch to the Septuagint. G1027. And this shows up in grasshopper? Really? I had to have messed that up. Immortal, this is going to be one of those words that means everything and we're not going to have any information. Let's go back to it. It's verse 17 and the word thunder is G1027, right? Right. So this Apostles Bible polyglot is the whole Bible in Greek. So you could take a Greek word from the New Testament, find out where it plugs into Septuagint, then you flip to the NASB and you can get the Hebrew word for it. That's the journey we're taking right now. Okay. So because I want to find the Hebrew word for sons of thunder to see it. Because if you do this with with the names, with Miriam, Elizabeth, Zechariah, if you do every one of their names and go find out what the Hebrew meaning is, you will smack your forehead over and over and over. Every one of them is named what they did. It's really cool, right? Right? Yeah. So it's got this .1 about it. I wonder why it says .1. So which one of these are we going to pick? Let's go with the Torah. G1027 and Leviticus 11:22. It sure does, right? So it's highlighted. It's G1027 is on Grasshopper. Now we flip to the NASB plus. Locusts. And what is the Hebrew word for locust? Is salam. Apparently the same as sense of crushing with a rock. Kind of crushing is crushing is the key to the thunder. So these guys had something about them had to do with hammers, crushing. Yeah. So yeah, so now you guys just got to see how Chris does word studies. Okay. I thought I'd find something aha, but we'll maybe spend more time on that later. And because I want you to have it. I don't want you to ask me everything. I want you to find it yourself, right? Because the Holy Spirit's going to guide all of you to study what you study, what you're interested in, and everybody has their own path. So if I can empower, right, which everybody else in the room's like, yeah, we know, right? Yeah. So if you get these tools, because that's where the Greek to Hebrew, there's a lot to the Greek, but I don't have time to learn the Greek. I learned some rudimentary Hebrew through word studies. So if I can get it from Greek to Hebrew, then we can kind of figure out what's going on. But yeah, all the Jewish names, it's not just Yeshua, it means salvation. Do you know what Stephen means? Just out of the blue. Switches to Catriel, means crowned one. Right. Yeah. So there's so much meaning in all of this stuff. So 34 to 38, I will translate. Jesus said to them, my food is the will of him who sent me. Do not say there's this many hours in the harvest. Already he who reaps is receiving his wages. For in this case, the saying says one sow, another reap. I sent you to reap that for which you have not labored. Others have labored and you have entered their labor. What he's saying in 21st century speak, aren't you guys seeing this? I talked to this lady. She dropped the pot, went back to the city, got the boys, brought them back, and you're over here worried about a sandwich, right? This is what he's really being nice to them, saying, don't you see what's happening here? Stop worrying about this minutia. And so from that city, many of the Samaritans believed in him because of the word of the woman who testified, he told me all the things I've done. One simple thing he did. He didn't feed 5,000 people. He didn't resurrect somebody. He just talked to her. She was obviously a woman with a messed up life. And that connection, that relationship connection, got her motivated to go tell everybody. Same as the guy that he removed the demons from. Remember? He says, don't tell anybody. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Eyes, and he ran out and was basically dancing the streets. Everybody already knew that you could see, obviously.
And you could see that guy got mad at them, at the rulers, because he's like, dudes, I can see, right? Right. I can see. And they're like, wasn't this guy, wasn't that guy? And they brought his parents in, and he's like, and his parents are like, why are you talking to us? He can see, right? Yeah. Yeah, that was good. So many more believed because of his word, and they were saying to the woman, it is no longer because of what you said that we believe. We have heard ourselves and know this is the one, indeed, the Savior of the world. Wow. Wow. Right? That's in a couple of sentences, this is the gospel of the kingdom, right? And I know we have our issues with Sunday Christianity, but they do this better than us, right? We have a long process, unlearn unlearn all this, learn all this stuff, right? And, we're really zealous when we first come to this. That's what you were talking about earlier, right? We're very much, letter of the law people for 4 or 5 years, right? Until we come into our own, because because we've been taught so wrong. We don't even know, like, so much of things that we were taught growing up are actually really bad sins that we're just like, we're afraid to move, right? I was telling somebody that today, I think, that when we first came to this, there were a couple of years where we didn't celebrate any holidays at all. We just did nothing because we're like, wait a minute, everything is pagan. Okay, we're just going to sit here and not be pagan for a while, right? Right. And then we learned about a group who was keeping the holy days, and then we were able to kind of grow into that. But you're absolutely right. We do get, I jokingly say, 15 years ago, me would disfellowship today, me, because I'm a little more relaxed today than in the beginning. So after 2 days, he went forth from there into Galilee, for Yeshua himself testified that a prophet has no honor in his own country. So the whole story here is to show us the juxtaposition between people who are hungry for the word, people today who know this society is coming to an end, right? Everything's falling apart. We can't even put together an airplane anymore, right? Everything's falling apart. People are hungry for answers, and unfortunately, they're turning to fantasy novels and crazy stuff, right? And the answer is here. The answer is, if you want to know why everything's messed up, it's because the ruler of this world, Satan, has got everybody so confused that we're at each other's throats, right? And the only way forward is to learn the Bible and have unity with Yahweh and his son, which will then bring unity with our neighbors. You see,
I was just going to say it's a new age stuff. It's like love everybody, accept everybody, but also bringing in, like, even Christians were bringing in tarot cards and all these other things that are pagan or evil, and bringing it into Christianity, or even just into a overall love everyone and accept everyone.
yeah, and and you can see that there is a replacement religion out there that is exactly what you just said, that there's no more genders, right? Who created genders? Yahweh created genders. Who wants to undo that? Satan wants to undo that, right? We have an apocalypse, right? Yeshua says that he's going to come back and all the works of the earth are going to be destroyed with intense heat. That's in Peter, right? What does mankind say? Oh, that intense heat is your fault. Well, it is, but it's not going to take 1,000 years, right? That intense heat is our fault because of the sins that we've heaped up, and so this replacement religion is right there in front of us. Yep. So he goes and heals an official's son. The juxtaposition does not end here. He came to Cana of Galilee, where he had made the water into wine, and there was a royal official whose son was sick at Capernaum. When he heard that Yeshua had come out of Judea into Galilee, he went to him and was imploring him to come down and heal his son, for he was at the point of death. So Yeshua said, unless you folks see signs and wonders, you simply won't believe, right? Remember, they're just walking away from probably the most successful evangelistic episode in his 3.5-year ministry, right? How little he had to do to get a region introduced to him as the Messiah. All right, we're going back into Judea, boys. Right? And here they are. They want a sign. So, sir, come before my child dies. He said, go, your son lives. Go on. Right? Yeah, it seems a little flippant. The man believed the word that Yeshua spoke of him and started off. As he was now going down, his slaves met him and saying his son was living. So it took time for him to get from here to where his son was. And they said, yesterday at the 7th hour, the fever left him the moment Yeshua spoke the word. Right? Now that's really powerful. But the lady at the well didn't need it. Neither did the Samaritan people. They didn't need this to believe. All they needed was his time. Yep. This again is the second sign Jesus performed when he had come out of Judea into Galilee. Go ahead. I actually at the end.
It reminds me of when Yeshua said, blessed is the one who has not seen and yet has believed.
Yeah. That's in here somewhere. Good call. Yeah. That's exactly right. Blessed, yeah, after Thomas, it was not, he's called doubting Thomas, but he's really jealous Thomas, right? He's like, you guys got to see him. Man, I'm not going to be happy until I get that. And then he says, go ahead, put your hand in my side or whatever. And then he gets chastised. You know, you should have believed your buds. Because again, perfect and not perfect, because he needed to see the proof. But the woman at the well went and told the guys, and they believed the least believable person and came galloping to him. Yep. Thomas should not have disbelieved his brothers. Yep. Anybody else? Any more quizzes? Well, I got all my stuff. I could get more software open.
Going back to what he said about earlier when he thought it was the Samaritans that said that he was calling a Samaritan dog. It was actually in Matthew 15 when he was talking, the Canaanite woman came to the region
Oh,
and
right.
her daughter was possessed, demon possessed. And then he said, send her away because she kept shouting at them. But he answered, I was only sent for the lost sheep of house of Israel. And then she came bowing down to him and answered, it is not good to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs.
Right.
But she said, yes, but even the dogs feed at the crumbs from the master's table.
Okay.
I had to correct it.
So,
Sorry.
we're not that far off. The Canaanite woman walking around in and amongst the Jews, trying to get an audience with the Messiah. She's taking her life in her hands, right? They don't want anything to do with the Canaanite person at all, right? Because they're the guys who didn't want him to rebuild the temple and all of that.
And yet she believed that he would heal the demon possessed daughter.
I just have a question on the Samaritans. Was this a small group that were core believers? Like we all are in a whole society. There's a core that stays with the truth. I mean, they didn't let things filter in and change. You know, they only knew what they knew and they've kept it.
Today,
And no, for this, I mean, at that time, they kept it was right in front of their face. That's what they were living. That's what they were waiting for. So when it was there, they saw it and knew it because they weren't distracted by all the other things that we have now.
so
I'm not saying it's an excuse. I'm just saying they were devoted. And maybe not all Samaritans. They were just a group.
So, you're probably right. It's never pure. Like when it says that John was baptizing all of Israel, you flip a couple pages, they're still baptizing people, right? So all doesn't always mean all, right? Right? It sometimes means the most. So in reality, you're right. We do have to stay grounded and realize that reality sets in and people are not automatons, right? But we don't really have much information on the Samaritans except what they provide. And they think that they've stayed pure for 2,500 years. Okay. Today, that book that you read, and they're very much devoted today. Now, what happened back then? I don't know. What I did notice is that she called it Jacob's well, which means she was taught that it was Jacob's well. To her, that's real. There's no doubt that that's Jacob's well, and there's no doubt in her mind that it was given to her ancestors, right? Yeah,
But they only believed in Genesis and Exodus and Leviticus?
five.
Of the
five.
Torah.
Torah,
Okay.
yeah. But they don't have Joshua. They don't believe that the temple should have been built at Jerusalem. They don't believe in the Tanakh, the Torah, the Nevi'im, the Ketuvim. They don't believe.
Maybe that's what my mom is.
Oh, she's rejected the Old
I don't know.
Testament too.
No, I mean, she's questioned some of the Old Testament.
Oh my, yeah, that's that. See, that's where Yeshua was really more familiar with the Pharisees than the rest of them, because the Pharisees are the ones who made the Septuagint in the Greek They're the ones that we get the canon of the Old Testament from. The Pharisees believed in Genesis to Malachi. The rest of these groups, right? Sadducees and Samaritans did not believe in the rest of it. They didn't believe in anything else after that. As in general, right? The Pharisees in general controlled the synagogue. The Sadducees controlled the temple. They were both on the Sanhedrin. So the Sanhedrin is the grand council where they had to, make all the big decisions. So it's never 100%, but Yeshua was hardest on the Pharisees because you discipline whom you love, you discipline whom you need, right? The Sadducees weren't going to live much longer. There aren't Sadducees anymore. They all got killed at AD 70, and the ones who didn't get killed became Pharisees and went in the synagogue. Same with the Zealots, same with the Sicarii. The Essenes were also a Puritan sect, the people from Qumran. They killed themselves. They went off and made their own private Idaho in Qumran, and that was the end of it. They got a Puritan. They didn't think that Jerusalem was pure enough for them, and that's why they were in Qumran. That's why they had a lab. Their city mirrored Jerusalem, and they made their own. They literally made their own place, and they don't exist anymore. But boy, were they good record keepers. Sir?
I understand that the Essenes were against marriage, so probably they weren't multiplying and died off.
Yeah,
Part
true
of it.
statement. That's another true one. They were very chaste. The history, if you want the history where I'm getting all this, is Josephus. Josephus is the authority on first century Judea history. And Josephus was a traitor. He was a Levite, and he was a Pharisee, which is there. See, you already have an asterisk because he had authority from the temple, but he wasn't a Sadducee, right? And he had authority over cities. He was one of the Levites that would go out to the cities, and he spent a lot of his time trying to stop uprisings, trying to stop people from destroying Rome. He was a traitor when AD 70 happened because he had Roman citizenship too. And so he flipped, and he was allowed to write a history. And the best history we have on first century Judea is the New Testament and Josephus. And so if you look at JewishEncyclopedia.com, they reference both the New Testament and Josephus, even though they don't like either one of them. Okay. Yep. That's what we have. Josephus is how we know what the temple looked like. We know that there were signs at the temple that told any outsider not to go further. If they went further, they would be killed. The signs were in 3 languages. And that Josephus is, I mean, if you got some time to kill, you said that book over there is the biggest one you've ever seen. This one's going to be a close second. It's a lot. We also learn about the doctrine of Abraham's bosom is in Josephus. Yeah, it's purgatory. Yeah, I still don't believe it, but just saying, right? Right. I was really shocked to find that his teaching on the state of the dead, but it's from Josephus. After it was over, he got to go to Rome, and he got a commission to write the history of the Jews, and so he spends a lot of time on that. And that's one of the books that if somebody tells me Josephus said, I get up and go to I don't like what page. Because a lot of people out there will say Josephus said because they're repeating what somebody else told them, right? And so, a big reason that Christianity likes it is he is a secular source of Yeshua's existence. He writes flatteringly of the Christians and of Yeshua. He even says if Yeshua could be called a man. He even says this Yeshua, if he could even be called a man. He writes very short sentences, but they're very flattering. And he gives an actual accounting of all the groups that were in Judea when it came down. Yeah. Philo is a historian from 50 years before Yeshua. He's nuts. I've got that book too. You want to borrow that one. You don't want to buy that one. Okay. Okay. That one. Philo is a Hellenistic Jew, if ever there was a Hellenistic Jew. He blends like he breathes. He was a philosopher. That's where we get this word philosophy is from Philo. Yep. And his claim to fame was he got called as part of, he was from Alexandria, he wasn't from Jerusalem, and he got called as part of a group to go to Rome to petition the emperor to not put idols in the temple. He did not succeed, but he came back alive. So that makes you famous. If you got to go argue against Rome to the Caesar and you lost the argument and you got away with your life, was considered a pretty big victory. So Philo's intriguing, and he is the one that is the first documentation or the only documentation that I can find that uses the word John 1:1 as uses the word as a buffer between God and mankind. That's where that comes from. And so that's why I bought it. As not smarter, but if you want to know references, right? Right? It's out there. It's something to read. Anybody else?